Hey everyone, it's Simone Watson, and this video has two purposes. First of all, I want to review a book that I recently read, technically listened to, which is Grown by Tiffany D. Jackson. I really love the audiobook, so if y'all want to read that book, I definitely would say the audiobook is the way to go. But I also want to reply to a video that I just watched by Jessie from Bowties and Books, because that video really illuminated some things for me and taught me some things that I didn't know, but also brought to kind of like put into words some things where I was like, oh, yeah. You know, I am going to respond to that because that does tie into Grown and Tiffany D. Jackson's work as a whole. Briefly, before we get started, here's a small thing. I changed my hair. And my hair is long now. I haven't had long hair in a very long time. So I'm gonna try not to play with it too much, but a part of me is just so giddy and just wants to like touch my hair all the time because I'm like, I love it, oh, I love it. I have already accidentally hit myself in the face with it just in the few days that I've had it. So, but I'm gonna try not to overdo that. Another thing, and this is, Jessie said the same thing, that they do the same thing, and that is I tend to smile when I'm upset, and you probably know if you've seen my recent video about the white default where sometimes I was just smiling because I was mad, and the white default perpetuates itself. So if you don't state any characters' races, then a lot of your readers are going to assume that your characters are white. That will probably happen in this video also, so I don't want you to think that because I'm smiling, even if I'm laughing, that it's because I think the stuff I'm talking about is a joke. Just wanted to clarify that right up front. So Jessie's video talks about thrillers, and specifically how thrillers written by people of color are judged differently from thrillers written by white authors. And Jessie also talked about something called horror noir. Lots of R's there, kind of makes it hard to say. I didn't know that was called that. So I'm not here to like glorify ignorance. Like if you have learned something new, it's good to go, you know, find out more about it. But I want to find out more about this because like, I just didn't know. I was like, wow, I have heard of Beloved. A lot of people have heard of Beloved by Toni Morrison, which is a horror novel and deals with the horrors of slavery. And I've definitely heard of Get Out. I still haven't seen Get Out. It's, and, you know, so I really would like to get more into horror noir as a subgenre and just, you know, horrors and thrillers, you know, in film and television and books that deal with the Black experience, because basically that's what that is described as. So horror noir being, you know, horror that deals with the Black experience. So I really encourage you to watch Jessie's video because Jessie knows a lot more about that than I do. But I was just thinking about, you know, the question of like, what is a thriller, and why something may feel like a thriller or not feel like a thriller. And this is where kind of the question of Tiffany D. Jackson's work comes into play, because the first book that I read by her 3 years ago was Allegedly, and that's her first novel. And I reviewed it on this channel, and I said that this book masterfully occupied the space of a thriller while also occupying the space of a dark contemporary novel, in the sense that it made me think and it made me really like come to understand things about society, and at the same time it was scary. It was, and I tend to think of thrillers as like surreal, like having a certain surreal quality, and I personally felt like Allegedly, like as the book went on, started to get more surreal. And I think of it as like floating, like kind of hovering above the ground, right? So like when it's realistic, it's grounded, and when it's a thriller, it's like still realistic, but it's kind of hovering a little bit in the sense of like suspension of disbelief. But that's not just because that's how I've always thought of a thriller doesn't necessarily mean that that's the correct way to define a thriller. Does that make sense? So I don't want to say like my way is right. Like that's just how I always thought of it. But allegedly is definitely a thriller. And I have a tendency to generally think like I don't like YA thrillers. I'll read YA in other genres, and I like adult thrillers. But allegedly was a YA thriller that like really resonated with me and was very well done and was 5 out of 5 stars for me. So I do think that I do think that when you, as we talked about the white default, right? And we talked about relating to characters, and we talked about the perception of certain things as universal when those things are actually universal to white people. And so the thing is, like, white people generally in the United States don't have to fear for their lives because they are white. And so someone having fears that relate to racism may be considered like an unusual kind of concept or something to a white reader. But like to black readers, that might be like, yeah, or like any person of color writing about scary things that have to do with their particular experience may at first not seem as scary to a white person as something, I hate to say it, but something they could imagine happening to themselves, because we want to be able to relate to the character that's going through the stuff that's in the book. And I do, as I said in my last video, I really want to challenge people to relate to characters. Challenge yourself to relate to characters that are different from you. And in particular, I want to challenge white people. If you're uncomfortable, I mean, you don't have to read anything that you don't want to read. But like, even if you're just like, man, like I'm kind of uncomfortable with that, or that didn't seem like a thriller to me, or that didn't seem that scary, like, it's a good opportunity to ask yourself why. That's pretty much the main gist of what I think about that. But yeah, so this just makes me think a lot about Tiffany D. Jackson and even Jason Reynolds. Like, I'm a huge fan of Jason Reynolds. He is definitely on my list of like my top 10 favorite authors. Other than like when you don't count the Bible and you only count other books, Jason Reynolds is among my top 10 authors. And he wrote this book, Long Way Down. And it just occurred to me, like, to wonder if that book is a horror novel. Because I think of it as a contemporary, but it's actually about a boy talking to ghosts. And the ghosts are representative of the effects of gun violence and like gang violence, and something that's a very real horror for a lot of people, and in particular a lot of black people. And I was like, man, like it never occurred to me that that might be considered a horror novel, but maybe. And so we get into Tiffany D. Jackson's work. And again, with Grown, she has managed to write a book that is so deeply disturbing on a level that makes you question real things in society and think about real things that, in particular, that black women go through. And I felt so many emotions reading this book. And when I first read it, I thought, you know, oh, well, this is kind of a mystery thriller, also mixed with kind of a contemporary feel, but I didn't feel the thriller elements that much or whatever. And it's just interesting to me because I think I could say that I didn't feel the thriller elements because it was also a book that was like making a real statement. And so it was really about stuff that I related to so much as a black woman that it was like, it didn't occur to me that like that's a thriller, or that I have this perception in my mind of a thriller that is based on, like Jesse said, based on like white, or like, Eurocentric thrillers, you know, and that has colored my perception of what a thriller is. But the other interesting thing about Grown by Tiffany D. Jackson is that there's a murder, you know that from the first page, okay, that someone has been murdered. But you also find out that the person that was murdered, it's hard to think of that person as a victim when you read the rest of the book, because that person is the antagonist in a lot of the book. And it's almost like I forgot about like the murder being a part of the plot when I was reading the stuff in the past. So I don't know, the stuff in the past was just affecting me so much. The book was told in a present and past kind of format, where it's like right after the murder and then also like before the murder. But I don't know. So that's something that I should think about. And I really hope that I'm not misspeaking or like saying something wrong about this topic, because I don't know. And I do want to know more. I want to know more about horror noir, because it's just so interesting to me. Okay, last thing before we go all the way into the discussion of Grown. It almost makes me wonder if one of the reasons why we see so many books, maybe movies too, I don't know, why we see these things that deal with Black pain specifically, and they are thrillers. It makes me wonder if it's because Black people are expected to write issue books. Like, Black people are expected to write things that say something about racism, or like that say something about Black pain, or like, you know, that if that's kind of this almost like limitation, or not limitation, but if that's like that's what publishing wants from you specifically, is like this specific type of horror that talks about Black pain, because publishing wants books about Black pain. And I don't mean that as like a negative toward those books. Like, we're talking about some great works of art, but it just makes me wonder, like, is publishing less likely to buy a book that is a thriller by a Black author if the book doesn't talk about like racial issues? And if that's the case, maybe publishing should check itself. I mean, there has been discussion these days of like letting Black people be free to write things that are not always about like racism, you know? And so I do think, you know, I think that when you're Black, like, a lot of things that you do can be taken as a statement, and like sometimes you just want to do what you want to do. So it's like, if you're gonna write a book and everyone's like, wow, this is a Black book, but you kind of just wanted to write the way you wanted to write. I mean, I don't know. It's gonna be affected by you being Black, but I don't know. It's just an interesting question. So, Grown by Tiffany D. Jackson. This book made me so mad. And it didn't make me mad in a way that would make me not like the book. It is quite the opposite. This book made me angry about something that is appalling, and it was so well written, and it was, I feel like, a book that is very much needed. And it said things about being a Black woman that really resonated with me a lot. And I encourage you, if you are okay with the content of this book, I do encourage you to read it. This book has a lot of potentially triggering content. It talks about abuse, including, you know, sexual abuse. It talks about, there are so many types of abuse in this book. Like, I would proceed with caution. It's physical, psychological, you know, sexual, like, there are lots of types of abuse in this book. So the book is about a girl named Enchanted, and she's 17, and she's a black girl, and she meets this superstar. His name is Corey. He's just, you know, he's 28. He's a black man. He is very famous, very rich, has a lot of influence, and, you know, has been like, you know, a musical star since he was young. And he tells her she has talent, and he tells her she's so beautiful, you know, you're so beautiful, blah, blah, blah. And they essentially get into a romantic relationship. It's hard to call it that because it's hard to call it a romantic relationship because really an adult should not be. There was so much that was wrong on his part that he shouldn't have done any of this stuff. There was so much that was wrong, and it is an abusive relationship. So Tiffany D. Jackson gave us some very well drawn characters. I actually listened to this. I said this already. I listened to the audiobook, and I think that like this book already is incredible, but the audiobook like even adds another layer to it because the audiobook narrator did a great job with all the characters' voices, and in particular with Corey's voice, as Corey was the abuser. Corey was very calculating, and when he first met Enchanted, he was so his demeanor was like a certain way because he was trying to like woo her, and he's like, you know, you're just so beautiful, you're just so beautiful. And the narrator did a great job of that kind of soft, smooth, you know, voice like that. And there did come a point where Enchanted was like on her phone or something, and then Corey was like, why are you all on your phone? And the way the narrator managed to like switch to that tone, like I jumped. I was like, and so this is where you kind of get into the abusive side. And I want to say something because Enchanted, the narrator, said that Corey, you know, has two sides. You know, he's on this one side, he's nice. He has this light side, but then he also has a dark side. And she just wishes that she could get the light side of him all the time. And I just want to say, this man did not have a light side and a dark side. This man had a dark side and a way of hiding his dark side. Okay, there was no point in time in this book where he was not an abuser. Like, I just want to make very clear from the time that their relationship began, like he already, I'm trying to think of how to describe that. It's like he knew what he was doing the whole time. So I didn't feel like, oh, he had a light side. Like, this is not written as a character that is just very nice, and then one day, you know, and I feel like we would give abusers too much credit if we thought of it that way, as like, oh, they were so nice until this one day. And it's like, no, something was wrong, like from the start. And every time because I expected there to be physical abuse, and I also expected there to be emotional abuse. I did not understand how far the emotional and psychological abuse was going to go. And I will say, this relationship was abusive long before he ever laid a hand on her. There was just so much to the abuse, and it made me want to weep because sometimes you can be going through abuse and not even know that it's abuse until later on. And that's what made me cry, because I didn't cry actually, but it made me want to cry because, you know, we've all seen, you know, movies or TV shows about abuse, and when it becomes physical, then it's like, you know, oh, obviously this is abuse, but like this book, there was so much control. I mean, it took me a long time in my life to understand truly the meaning of emotional abuse. This was absolutely that. There was so much control. And then this comes back to something Jesse said about like feeling anxiety when you're reading a book, and kind of that, like that being a characteristic of a thriller. I was so anxious, I was so scared, but I was also like so saddened by this book because I felt like, oh, I don't want to cry. I might cry. This is one of those I'm laughing because I'm upset. I felt like I could so easily picture my 17-year-old self being in Enchanted's position. I could so understand like why she was doing what she was doing, and because I am an adult now, I'm 26, I have gained knowledge, you know what I'm saying, that's like, wow, like I can see that there are signs here. But like there are so many people, I think, who want to blame her or want to blame any teenage girl for, first of all, wanting to be in a relationship with a grown man. Like, you know, want to blame people who want to blame her. And I'm like, no, like if you're a teenager and somebody who you've admired from afar, who is, like I said, a superstar, comes and is paying attention to you, you know, and it's just, it just makes me so frustrated that anyone would want to fault her for it, because who wouldn't be starstruck? Okay, like, and so the thing here is that it's important to know, like, to understand how to like see the signs that like, no, like this is not, something is wrong here, you know. But she was so young, and like by the time, I don't know, she was so young, but here's the thing, it's not her fault at all. And I think when you're in an abusive relationship, that can be another thing, like the feeling that like, okay, something happened, but now I'm gonna do everything right, and it's never gonna happen again. The abuse is never gonna happen again because I'm gonna do everything right. And I feel like she may have had that feeling, like, okay, if she would just do this, this, and this. And it's like, no, like if you're watching this and you're in an abusive relationship, no, it's not about what you do wrong or right. It's not about that. It is not about that. It's not about you. So like you cannot, I hate to say you can't change that person, but you can't change that person. And so it's so further damaging, but it's so like almost inevitable to like turn your anger inside, that, you know, it must be you must have done something wrong, and no, you didn't. So the fact is, I didn't blame Enchanted for anything that happened here in this book. And I feel like there is this, it's really, you know, talked about in the book that like, it's not her fault. And like, and a quote from this book that I really, really like is the quote, "Not looking their age don't change their age." What that means is if someone says, because in this case, people were talking about a grown man having had relationships with teenage girls, and talking about a girl that was this age or that age. Oh, well, she didn't look 14. She didn't look 15. Somebody said. And then somebody else was like, not looking their age don't change their age. In other words, like, It's not fair. It is not fair to not allow black girls to be girls, like not allow them to be kids because they look a certain way. It's not fair because there's so many layers that could be put on that's essentially victim blaming, because you think that because a child, whatever she does that makes you think she's grown, you know, because a child is wearing makeup or whatever she's doing, that gives any adult a pass to abuse her and use her. No, not at all. And the thing is, it's so frustrating because it's like I was saying, like as a teenager, it's easy to get starstruck, but also like as a teenager, like it's so easy to want to be older. It's so easy as a teenager to want to be an adult, and also to think that you are, to think that you're just like an adult. Cause I mean, you're young, and it's not fair to say that for black girls, you don't get to wish to be an adult without people deciding that you're an adult, and they're gonna pile stuff on you that shouldn't be piled on you. Does that make sense? Like, no one should be abused whether they're an adult or a teenager or a child. Okay, no one should be abused at all. But it's just not fair to expect black teenage girls to be adults when they're not. Does that make sense? And so there's no excuse. There's no excuse for an adult to even be, there's no excuse for an adult to be using a teenager in this way. It is disgusting. And yeah, it's just not looking their age don't change their age. It's just that very much encapsulates like the idea that it's like, stop acting like as soon as black girls start to look a little bit older, you know, for whatever reason, that they're no longer kids, and stop acting like black girls shouldn't be protected. So this book also, it had a quote from Malcolm X, and it was saying like the most disrespected person in America is the black woman. The most unprotected person in America is the black woman. I think it said that. It wasn't in that order. It might have been in that order. I'm not sure. But it was like so deep. And so this book just really went into like being a black woman and being kind of not being protected from things even as a kid, and like kind of having people expect you to just like be tough and just deal with things, and people treating you like kind of like everything is your fault, just all kinds of stuff. And so I feel like I could go on and on about this book, but I just want to say it's so beautiful. It's so well done. I hope I'm not forgetting anything because I didn't take notes for this video, but it's just like heartbreaking, and I really hope that people will read this and come away from the practice of victim blaming, because victim blaming is so harmful. Victim blaming is very harmful, and this man knew what he was doing, and it was just horrifying. Okay, and another thing also, see, I kept thinking if I made this video I was gonna yell, but I am pretty mad. Here's something that made me really mad. Not only was Corey abusive, but there were other adults in this book that either knew what he was doing and looked the other way, or like sometimes they like aided in his whole thing that he was doing. And it made me so mad. It made me so mad that other adults were participating in this. And so, yes, I do hold them culpable as well. Okay, so that just made me so mad. And like, I guess because this character had money and influence, like we said, like he had money, he had influence, people wanted to be his friend, people wanted to be on his good side, whatever. They just decided to look the other way while he did this crap that was so terrible. And I guess maybe they saw him as like their, what do you call it, meal ticket or something. Like other people were making money off of him, so they just wanted to let him do what he wanted to do. And it was so sad, and it was so, like, there was no reason for the abuse. And like I said before, it was not Enchanted's fault, but it was like, I didn't understand why. And it's like, there's not really a good reason. I mean, he just the idea of a person trying to make another person feel small to that extent was just, it was just really sad. Something to note before we go, this book does have on the page drug use. The drug in question is not marijuana. It's something that is illegal all over the US, I'm pretty sure. I'm not going to tell you what it is simply because I had to Google it. Like, I thought I knew what it was, but I kind of wasn't sure. I had to Google it, and I don't want to tell y'all what it is and then you Google it, if that makes sense. I don't know. I just don't want to, I'm not sure if that makes sense or not, but just so you know, there is on the page drug use. Yeah, but thank you so much for watching, and thank you again to Jessie from Bowties and Books for your brilliant video. Oh, and thank you to Tiffany D. Jackson for writing Grown. Before I go, I'm going to say it one more time. If you are in an abusive relationship, please understand it's not your fault, and please understand that you can get help. Okay, I'm going to see y'all in my next video.